Ladies and gentlemen, from peace to foreign policy, our next speaker for this session is our chief guest, the Honorable Minister of External Affairs, Professor G.L. Peiris. Possibly one of the finest, if not the finest orator in the international fora today. And to invite him, I respectfully invite the Commander of the Army, Lieutenant General Dayaratnayak.
Distinguished invitees, delegates from overseas and home, ladies and gentlemen, it gives me immense pleasure to introduce to you an eminent personality par excellence who has been reflecting our nation's interest in forums across the world while working hard to dispel wrong and malicious perceptions against this country. As you know, the formulation of the foreign policy in a post-conflict scenario unavoidably plays a pivotal role since it encompasses how reconstruction and reconciliation efforts are projected elsewhere. Without any argument, one of the finest orators of our time, Professor G.L. Peiris, blends academic knowledge and wide experience on contemporary issues together, which I am certain would be beneficial and enlightening to you. Professor G.L. Peiris, having had his primary and secondary education at St. Thomas College, Mount Lavinia, which is one of the leading private schools in Sri Lanka, obtained a Bachelor of Law degree with first-class honors from the University of Colombo, having secured an unprecedentedly high aggregate. In 1968, he won the Rhodes Scholarships and proceeded to the University of Oxford, where he obtained the Doctor of Philosophy degree in 1971. On his return to Sri Lanka, he joined the staff of the university and rose to the post of Vice-Chancellor at the University of Colombo prior to entering into politics. Professor Peiris is the author of many books in the field of law which are considered of high academic value by researchers. He has contributed immensely to international journals by publishing more than 70 papers in prestigious law journals, to date, some of which have been referred regularly in academic forums. He was awarded Doctor of Philosophy degree from the University of Colombo in 1974, recognizing his academic credentials. He was elected Visiting Fellow of All South College, University of Oxford, Distinguished Visiting Fellow of Christ's College, University of Cambridge, and Sumat's Visiting Fellow in Commonwealth Studies in the University of Cambridge, and Butterworth Visiting Fellow in the Institute of Advanced Legal Studies, University of London. He is also an associate member of the International Academy of Comparative Law and Senior British Council Fellow. Having entered politics in 1974, Professor Peiris was appointed the Minister of Justice, Constitutional Affairs, Ethnic Affairs and National Integration, and the Deputy Minister of Finance and Planning. From 2000 to 2002, he served as Minister of Industrial Development and Constitutional Affairs and Deputy Minister of Finance and Planning. In 2002, he He also was appointed as chief negotiator in the then government's peace process. Professor Peiris served as the Minister of Enterprise Development, Industrial Policy and Investment Promotion and Minister of Constitutional Affairs from 2002 to 2004. In 2007, he was appointed the Minister of Export, Development and International Trade, a position which he held until he was appointed Minister of External Affairs in 2002. Ladies and gentlemen, it is my privilege now to invite the day's chief guest, Honorable Minister of External Affairs, Professor G.L. Peiris, to take the floor for a critical examination of the ascension of Sri Lanka in the aftermath of the conflict. Sir, over to you.
Our distinguished visitor from India, Dr. Subramaniam Swamy, Governor Chandrasiri, Secretary to His Excellency the President, Mr. Lalit Weeratunga, Secretary to the Ministry of Defence and Urban Development, Mr. Gotabaya Rajapaksa, Commander of the Army, other service commanders, distinguished participants at this seminar from overseas and from our own country, ladies and gentlemen. My friend Mr. Lalit Weeratunga told us a few minutes ago that this is a delightful experience. It certainly is that. I think it is also an invaluable opportunity to collect our thoughts on where we are today, how we have got there, and the trajectory for the future. This is why I sincerely believe that Mr. Gotabaya Rajapaksa is to be very warmly congratulated on the attitude that he has adopted. We are not simply basking in the glory of a military victory. That is certainly not the attitude of Mr. Rajapaksa and of this country. On the contrary, we are reflecting deeply on the causes of the conflict, how it was that we were able to accomplish what is seen by the world as a miracle. Nobody believed that it would be possible for this country in the field of battle, the most relentless terrorist organization that flourished in the world. So all that is behind us, that is water under the bridge. Although we are legitimately proud of that achievement. Today we are discussing the challenge to a rising nation. In other words, we are focused on the future. We need perceptively to identify the challenges and then to explore pragmatic avenues for confronting and overcoming those challenges. There are many challenges, but if you ask me to select one, the dominant challenge, without hesitation, I would answer that the dominant challenge is the relentless pressure that is being exerted on this country by a segment of the international community. And it seems to us, honestly, a great pity that when the country is picking itself up, leaving behind us the pain and the anguish of 3 decades of terror. And we are progressing with regard to economic and social development in the manner that was explained so lucidly to us earlier this morning by Dr. P. Vijayasundara. When all these exhilarating developments are taking place around us, it does seem a matter for profound regret that so much energy, so much effort, not to mention the pecuniary resources that have necessarily to be expended every few months, every 6 months, in warding off these challenges with which we are confronted. I attended the high-level segment of the Human Rights Council in Geneva a few months ago. And a very distinguished foreign minister from a country that is not known traditionally to be very supportive of Sri Lanka. Of course, I will not mention the country, I will not identify the foreign minister, but he was sitting next to me and he was following the proceedings. Spontaneously, he made to me a remark which I thought was very interesting. He told me, look at this. Look at what is happening in the world around us. The carnage, the bloodshed, the violence that engulfs large swaths of the globe. And yet here we are putting Sri Lanka in the very forefront of our discussions. And he asked me, I sometimes wonder whether we are living in this planet. This reflected the total lack of balance and proportion. Are the circumstances in this country worthy of this degree of negative attention? This inexorable pursuit of a country which has found its way out of one of the darkest eras in its history and is now looking forward to the future with hope and confidence and expectation. Is this the way in which the international community or a section of it should deal with Sri Lanka? And this was the spontaneous thought that was articulated to me by a foreign minister whom I did not know personally and who did not represent a country that was traditionally and consistently supportive of Sri Lanka. Now, at the very outset, I want to dispel a particular fallacy. It is indeed a profound misconception. It is not the policy of the government of Sri Lanka to distance ourselves from the world community and to tell the world outside, leave us alone. We will manage our affairs. That is very far from being the approach that we are adopting to the emotive and contentious issues that represent the substance of this very timely seminar. The best example of this is a stand which Sri Lanka on the resolution that was adopted by the Human Rights Council in March this year. What we have stated categorically, unequivocally, in terms which cannot possibly be misinterpreted or mistaken, is that we draw a clear distinction, a very clear dichotomy between Operative Para 2 and Operative Para 10. Operative Para 2 calls upon the government of Sri Lanka to strengthen in every manner possible the local mechanisms that His Excellency President Rajapaksa has set up to deal with these issues. We have absolutely no problem or reservation with regard to the content of Operative Para 2. And it is precisely for that reason that His Excellency, the President, as recently as the 15th of August, took the step of engrafting some of the world's leading specialists in international humanitarian law to assist the local commission, which we appointed last year, headed by a very competent former High Court judge. So it was the view of the government that there must be transparency, enhanced credibility if that is necessary. And that is the rationale for taking this step of appointing to an advisory council to the local body persons of impeccable stature, unassailable credentials, to give freely of their expertise, and thus to fortify and to further invigorate a local mechanism which has already been set up. So that is the gist of our approach to Operative Para 2. Operative Para 10 is a very different matter, because it is Operative Para 10 which mandates an international investigation. That is absolutely repugnant to us, and there are no circumstances in which this country will be national investigation. I might mention that two large countries, India and Indonesia, while abstaining on the resolution as a whole, voted against Operative Para 10. So Operative Para 10 is basically unacceptable. Now I will tell you why. Now I wish in this presentation to be as candid as possible and as appropriate. This is no objective investigation at all. It would therefore be a dereliction of public trust on the part of the elected government of this country to acquiesce in what purports to be, but indeed is not, a proper international investigation. I will give you some very compelling reasons for that. We are well aware that anyone who is an adjudicator of facts, anyone whose duty is to bring his mind to bear upon a set of facts and to come to a considered, dispassionate conclusion, is expected to behave in a particular manner. Look at the public behavior of some of the people who have been entrusted with this task. One of them has said publicly, public interviews which have been published both here and abroad, the lady concerned said, I don't think this inquiry needs to take much time. The information is all out there in the public domain. It is embedded in reports which have already been compiled and published. So we don't see why our work should be time-consuming. The same person said, if Sri Lanka is not prepared to allow us to come into the country, we will fly people out from Sri Lanka into neighboring countries, and if necessary into Geneva, and we will obtain evidence from them. Furthermore, we will protect their identity. Nobody will know where this evidence is coming from, what is the probable motivation. Nobody will be able to filter this evidence to decide what its probative value is, whether it is inherently intrinsically credible, whether it could be fabricated or exaggerated, whether there is a clear motive for doing so. And nobody who has even a nodding acquaintance with the basic rudiments of natural justice and procedural fairness could possibly be persuaded that an inquiry that is conducted on the basis of evidence obtained in that manner can contain within it even the semblance of a fair, impartial, proper inquiry. It is not an inquiry at all. It is a travesty of justice. People lurking in the shadows, having every motive to malign this country, will be given a free opportunity, without any restraint or inhibition, to undertake precisely that task, because their identity, so we are informed by the people conducting the investigation, will never be revealed to the outside world. And if anybody should suggest that the elected leaders of this country must agree to submit this country to of that sort, then I think the whole concept of public trust would need to be redefined. I would also like to address candidly to you some remarks on a matter which is of interest not only to Sri Lanka, but to many other countries in this region and beyond. Today we have a situation where evidence is being compiled for transmission to Geneva in a clandestine manner. People are being brought, the evidence is being recorded, there is talk of financial inducement, the people coming are not even aware what they are coming for. All of this is happening against a backdrop of some other developments which are profoundly distressing. The foreign minister of another Asian country told me quite recently, what you are seeing in Sri Lanka is not peculiar to your own country. We find that on the eve of major elections, there are very large sums of money, colossal sums of money that come into our country from overseas. These fill the coffers of non-governmental organizations. They are asked, what is this money intended for? The answer is, this money is going to be used for capacity building, nebulous phrases which have no real meaning. And this money can be used for any purpose whatsoever. And the practical reality of the matter is that it is in fact used for direct intervention in the domestic politics of the country concerned. The foreign minister concerned told me, we have this very serious problem. And if you are addressing the problem, please share your thoughts with us, because we would like to work together in concert to deal with a phenomenon which we regard as inimical to the substance of democracy, because the fate of this country, its destiny and its future, must lie in no other hands than the hands of the sovereign electorate of this country. Some other countries in this region have a detailed regulatory. There is a compulsory duty of disclosure. What is the source of the funds? What is the quantum? What is the purpose for which the funds are intended? There must be proper audit procedures. In the case of some of these organizations, there have been no audit procedures for more than a decade. In Sri Lanka, regrettably, the regulatory framework is very weak. I would say almost non-existent. In sharp contrast with the detailed legal provisions which are operative in some other jurisdictions of South Asia. Now, when our critics are faced with facts which are incontrovertible, the response is something like this. We held the Commonwealth Summit in November this year, and just 2 weeks ago in Myanmar, some people who attended that meeting told me, we still have vivid memories of your country, what we saw, which we were genuinely proud of as representatives of other developing countries. What we had been told in advance of our visit stood in sharp contrast with the evidence of our own eyes, what we saw on the ground. The phenomenal development which is taking place in your country is beyond belief, and we would indeed not have believed it had we not been exposed to it ourselves through first-hand personal observation. When that reality is pointed out, our critics say, yes, that is right. That is physical development, bricks and mortar and concrete. What about the other side of it? What about reconciliation? So that is sought to be identified as the Achilles heel, as a matter in respect of which we are thought to be vulnerable. It is a deep conviction of the government of Sri Lanka that there cannot be any meaningful reconciliation without economic development. If all that you are sharing is human misery, disenchantment, and bitterness, there cannot be reconciliation. But we certainly do not believe that economic development is the only component of reconciliation. It is a necessary condition, but it is not a sufficient condition. Now, on the subject of reconciliation, which is certainly one of the challenges that the rising nation of Sri Lanka is confronting today, I want to say this, that nobody has a monopoly of wisdom with regard to reconciliation. To pretend otherwise is nothing short of unabashed and unacceptable arrogance. A foreign minister of a country in the Gulf region told me, we are heirs to very proud civilizations, and those civilizations are second to nobody. This was said to me by a foreign minister representing a Muslim country. He said, we are proud of our culture. It has distinctive features which we need not only to preserve, but to build upon amidst the turbulent conditions of the contemporary world. In the Buddha Dhamma, there is inspiring material with regard to reconciliation, the Dhammapada in particular. And the last sermon which Gautama the Buddha delivered before his demise, the Mahaparinibbana Sutra, the seminal idea contained in the Buddhist scriptures with regard to reconciliation is that when something painful happens in the life of an individual, in the life of a family, in the life of a society, we need to handle it with finesse and sensitivity. And the fundamental objective is to ensure that you confine these painful experiences to the past, and you do not permit them to spill over into the present and the future. Now, on the subject of external intervention on the purported ground of reconciliation, I want to tell you this. As the country's foreign minister or external affairs minister, it's obviously not appropriate for me to refer to particular instances, but I want to make this general observation. If you look at what is happening in the world around us, this much can be stated without fear of contradiction, because indeed it is self-evident. External intervention can bring about a change of regime, an overthrow of an established government. But external intervention cannot handle the fallout the loss of human life, the devastation of the economy, the total chaos that is set in motion is power, however exalted, to deal with adequately. You can change the situation. You can get rid of leaders. You can even assassinate them, as has been the fate of several. But what happens next? If you look at the consequences which have been triggered by external intervention. We need to ask ourselves, in all earnest, the question whether there is reason for satisfaction with the consequences that have emanated from that kind of intervention. Has there been stability, prosperity, and well-being? Or on the contrary, has there been devastation, anarchy, and the disintegration of societies, which have been founded upon certain practices and traditions and principles? After all, every country has a social fabric, a social structure. If you annihilate it, then the consequences that we are seeing, the very painful, the very distressing consequences that we are seeing in many parts of the world, particularly in North Africa and the Middle East, are not surprising. Now, if you agree with that, and I think it is very difficult to disagree with that proposition, because it is there for us to see before our very eyes. Although in some international bodies, those developments seem to be attracting less attention than Sri Lanka, and that is what my friend referred to. He said, are we living in this world or in some other world? Now, the reality that emerges from all of this is that reconciliation, if it is to be sustainable, if it is to serve this nation in any pragmatic sense, must emanate from the heartthrob, from the culture, from the cherished beliefs and traditions which have grown up and which have been consolidated on our own soil. That is not by any means an isolationist approach. It's not that we need to shut our eyes to other experiences. By all means, look at other experiences which are productive. Learn from them. But always we have to adapt them to the permutation and combination of circumstances which are characteristic of our own country. Now, I want to tell you this in all sincerity. I have said this abroad, but I haven't said this. Mr. Rajapaksa is certainly to be congratulated, not only on starting good things, but being able to maintain them. Many good things are started with lots of benign intentions, but they fall by the wayside. But this defense seminar is being held now for the 4th year. And that's an achievement. Not to mention the 54 countries that are participating in it. Now, if you ask me, what is the real damage which these people are doing to this country? These good Samaritans who say it is their love for this country, nothing else. It is altruistic. It is that drives them and motivates them to bring resolution and after resolution against it. 3 consecutive years. What is the real harm that they are inflicting on this nation? My answer is the following. The real harm is this, that wittingly or unwittingly, they are denigrating the only process which has the potential and the capability to deliver a result on the ground. If reconciliation is to be achieved, it must be the result of a local process, a domestic, a homegrown, homespun process. There is indeed such a process in this country. But because of this pressure, and because of the perception and indeed the reality that some of the world's most powerful countries are backing these resolutions against Sri Lanka, the people who must participate in the local process to make it meaningful and productive are telling themselves, why must we settle for this? We can get everything. By encouraging the proponents of these resolutions to exert more and more and more pressure on Sri Lanka and to extort from Sri Lanka whatever they desire, the way forward, the means of doing it, the ratcheting up of pressure at the international level. There is today the deep conviction on the part of the people concerned. I can tell you that when this matter was being considered, whether to hold the Governor Chandrasiri is here, whether to hold the provincial council elections in the northern province, there were very influential members of the government who said to the president, why are you doing this? 4 of your predecessors did not do it. Those elections were not held for 28 years. 28 years, those elections were not held. So the advice was tendered to His Excellency the President in all good faith by some members of the government. Why are you inviting for yourself a host of problems? It is because of the anticipation of those problems that your predecessors did not do it. But President Rajapaksa, to his credit, said, the time has come to do what is politically expedient. And there was a sequence to it. President Rajapaksa said, I have started by dealing with the humanitarian concerns of 296,000 people who are displaced. I have subsequently turned my attention to the economic development of the northern province, the GDP of which is growing 3 times as rapidly as the GDP of the rest of the country. So he has addressed the humanitarian factors, then the economic factors. Next comes, logically and sequentially, political empowerment, which cannot happen without the suffrage. So he said, no, whatever the difficulties may be, I'm going to give the people of the north the franchise, the right to elect their provincial council. And today, and we knew very well, there's no harm in saying it very candidly, the government knew very well that that election would not be won. Nevertheless, the president had the political courage to make a decision which 4 of his predecessors did not make. He held that election. So now the provincial council is in existence, and there's a parliamentary select committee process. I said this recently to some of my colleagues whom I met in Myanmar, some representing very big countries. I told them, in life, there are 2 ways of handling any situation, any problem. Either you can keep whining and complaining and groaning about what you don't have. And that becomes an excuse, finally, for standing still, not moving forward. How can I do it? I don't have this or that. Now, no provincial council in this country has all the authority that they desire. Everybody is asking for more. That is not peculiar to the provincial council of the northern province. But the northern provincial council, and this can be established empirically, the northern provincial council has sufficient authority to start delivering on the matters which are of relevance and concern to their people. Some people adopt the totally mistaken notion that we must begin implementing the 13th Amendment. There's no question of commencement in that regard. The 13th Amendment is substantially implemented, and that can be proved. It is substantially implemented in all areas except one, the devolution of police power. And in answer to the leader of the opposition in the Sri Lankan parliament, soon after my meeting, a very warm, cordial, a productive meeting with my distinguished counterpart in the Indian government, Srimati Sushma Swaraj, when I was asked a series of questions by the leader of the opposition, I stated categorically on the floor of parliament that police power will not be devolved, not for reasons which have a particular application to the north or the east, but because in terms of general public policy, that is fundamentally counterproductive and undesirable. But every other area, including land use, allocation of resources, the power to generate revenue, even very substantial control over the regional public service, very significant, very substantial powers have been devolved to the Northern Provincial Council. Now, instead of using that power to start delivering, to keep going and crying to Western powers, the countries that are pursuing us, and say, we are impotent, we are powerless, there's nothing we can do. That is not a constructive approach. The constructive approach is to use what one has, a bird in the hand, utilize it, imaginatively, creatively, effectively. Then as you go along, by all means, try to expand it and build upon it. Now the real harm that these people are doing to my country is this, that there is a disincentive because of the intensity of this pressure. There is a disincentive to engage in earnest in a domestic process because of the conviction that far more is forthcoming by the application of pressure at the international level. And the optics of engagement, in a local process will take the wind out of the sails of the international process. And that is why, that is the real reason why there is reluctance or hesitation to engage in the local process. So that is why this international pressure is not only not helpful, but is absolutely harmful, detrimental. Now that is a point that I would like to make. Now, before I conclude, I would like to touch on just a couple of points. With regard to our response to the challenges with which Sri Lanka is today confronted, the thinking of President Mahinda Rajapaksa and his government contains these salient characteristics. One is, in order to move this country forward and to provide satisfaction to our people over a sustained time frame, it is not enough simply to gauge or to measure economic development in terms of GDP, per capita incomes, and so on. And this is something that President Rajapaksa has consistently said. When we were planning the Commonwealth Summit, he told us repeatedly, choose as your theme something that has meaning to the vast mass of our people. Let it be something with which the people of our country can identify. And that is why we chose as the overriding theme economic development with social equity. Economic development with social equity. And many leaders of South Asia, in informal discussions that I had with them, sometimes when I went to invite them, they particularly value of that theme. So what we are protecting in this country, last weekend I addressed a series of meetings and I told our people, you must protect what you have won. Don't assume with a sense of complacency that all this is there before you to be enjoyed in perpetuity. You must bestir yourselves. Protect the hard-won victories. What have our people gained? What we have seen during the last few years is nothing short of a social renaissance in this country. In the course of the introduction by the Army Commander, Lieutenant General Dharatnaka, he referred to my career in the university. In those days, very few people from the rural areas got into our universities, not because there was anything lacking in them, but because the facilities in rural schools were simply not adequate in terms of laboratories, computer facilities, sports facilities. Today, the rural child has come into his or her own. That is a real achievement of this government. Equality of opportunity and social mobility, about which my friend Mr. Lalit Veeratunga spoke so eloquently. But that was something that was realized and achieved, accomplished in the recent past. The rural child competing with children from the most privileged backgrounds, entering the university, obtaining their degrees, laying the foundation of a successful life, finding employment in the public sector, and also using their inherent creativity, ingenuity, and resourcefulness to ameliorate their condition in life by having access to resources for self-employment programs, upon which a particular emphasis was laid in the last budget presented to Parliament by His Excellency the President. So that is what I mean by a social renaissance. Now, that is what needs to be protected against all these other forces which are pursuing us so relentlessly at this time. So that's with regard to the security dimension. Mr. Gotabaya Rajapaksa has every reason to be very proud of the fact that what we have achieved is not only for the people, not only for the 20.5 million people in this country, but today this island is rendering yeoman service in preserving the tranquility of the oceans, the waters around us. We have a joint working group with the Government of Australia, and the Government of Australia has publicly expressed warm appreciation of the role, in particular, of the Sri Lanka Navy in mitigating one of the most distressing human problems that the contemporary world has had to deal with. We are closely associating ourselves with the Indian Ocean Rim Association, the Indian Ocean Commission. All of this would not have been possible if terrorism was alive and kicking in this country. I say quite realistically that the picture, the landscape of the entire subcontinent would have been different if terrorism was flourishing in this country. So this is not an achievement for the exclusive benefit of the people of Sri Lanka, but it's an achievement which transcends the shores of this island. Now, one last point. Underpinning all of this, the effectiveness of President Rajapaksa's government in confronting these challenges to the rising nation of Sri Lanka is underpinned by one other consideration which seems to me to be very crucial. And that is a very healthy emphasis on cultural traditions. You know, I've seen this myself because I've been in politics for quite a long time. Say, when the national anthem is sung, there really is a difference today. The way people react with a sense of pride. This is ours. We associate ourselves with this. Now, that feeling was not there earlier. The spontaneous pride that people feel in belonging to this nation is today very much a factor in the contemporary political and social landscape of this island. So this is why we stress that all these do-gooders, these good Samaritans who have lessons to deliver to this country, forgetting that far too often they do not live up to their own lessons and their own precepts. This country has a solid cultural foundation, traditions that we have protected and nurtured and developed over the centuries, traditions that have made us what we are. And these are the traditions which give us the strength and the courage to confront the future with confidence. So these are my thoughts, for what they are worth, on the situation of this country at the present time and what we envision as a pragmatic approach to dealing with our challenges in the future. Convey my very warm thanks to the Secretary to the Ministry of Defence and Urban Development, Mr. Gotabaya Rajapaksa, the Commander of the Sri Lanka Army, Lieutenant General Daratnayaka, and all those who have been instrumental in organizing and maintaining the continuity of this seminar, which is now established for itself a reputation not only in this country, but throughout the world. I deem it a great honor and a privilege to have been invited to address you this morning. I thank you for it. Wish your deliberations every success. Thank you.